Queen Aichi loved sitting by the river, her favorite place where she could find peace and solitude. The gentle sound of the flowing water brought her comfort, especially as she neared the end of her pregnancy. At 9 months, the weight of the child seemed to slow her every movement, but she still found solace by the riverbank. As she gazed at the serene waters, a sharp pain suddenly seized her body. Her breath caught in her throat, and she realized in a rush of panic that the baby was coming. Alone in her moment of agony, she cried out, but the silence around her was deafening. No one was near to help her, and the pain intensified with each passing second. Desperately, she gave birth, the child emerging into the world in the quiet of the wilderness. When she looked down, her heart froze. The baby's skin was pale, completely white, unlike her and the king, both dark-skinned. The sight of him filled her with dread. She feared the king would believe she had betrayed him, and the consequences would be dire. In a panic, she gently placed the baby in the water, hoping the river would carry him away to safety, away from the cruel judgment she feared. As the baby floated down the river, his fate seemed sealed. But fortune smiled upon him, for he was found by Queen Mary, the wise mermaid ruler. As she cradled the fragile child in her arms, the baby began to choke, his breath shallow and erratic. Queen Mary, with her ancient powers, leaned down and kissed him on the forehead. In that moment, magic surged through him, and he was transformed. His skin took on a shimmering, iridescent quality, turning him into a mermaid, a creature of both water and magic. Queen Mary named him Prince Callow, and she raised him in her underwater kingdom, where he grew strong and luminous, his pale skin glowing in the depths. The once fading mermaid realm began to thrive with the arrival of Callow, whose presence brought prosperity to the kingdom. Callow's beauty and power were unlike anything the mermaids had ever seen. His glowing skin became a symbol of hope, and the mermaids believed he was destined for greatness. Over time, Princess Decca, Queen Mary's daughter, grew close to Callow, treating him as a beloved brother. She adored him, and her bond with him grew as they spent their days together. Meanwhile, back in the human kingdom, Queen Aichi had returned to the palace, cradling a different child, Prince Arens. The king, though confused and heartbroken over the loss of his firstborn, accepted Arens as his son. Queen Aichi kept the painful secret of the child she had abandoned, hiding it deep within her heart. The king, convinced that his son had been born with a special gift, took pride in his new heir, unaware of the truth. For years, the king longed for another child, but Queen Aichi struggled to conceive. The pressure grew unbearable. One evening, as they sat in the royal chambers, the king confessed that he was waiting for someone. Queen Aichi's heart sank. She feared that the child she had abandoned, the one with the white skin, was the one the king was expecting. Her mind raced and her body trembled with fear, unsure of what to do. The king, unable to find peace, consulted the chief priest, who revealed an ancient prophecy. Every 200 years, a child with white skin, a gift from the gods, would be born. This child would bring strength and prosperity to the kingdom. The king realized that this special child should have already been born, and he grew suspicious of Queen Aichi's past actions. Driven by a need for answers, he demanded that she confess. In her fear, Queen Aichi revealed the truth, that she had abandoned their white-skinned child by the river. The king's fury was immeasurable. The chief priest, seeing the queen's remorse, explained that her actions, though wrong, had been driven by fear of the king's wrath. Yet the king, consumed by rage, ordered a search party to find the child. The soldiers scoured the river for hours, but the baby was nowhere to be found. The chief priest, sensing the child was still alive, believed he had been taken by the mermaids. Enraged, the king declared he would go to war with the mermaids to reclaim his son. However, one of the king's advisors suggested a more peaceful approach. He recommended that the king send a letter to the mermaids, requesting the return of the child. Reluctantly, the king agreed, writing a letter filled with demands and threats. King Yu's letter was filled with authority. He demanded the return of Prince Callow from the mermaids within 3 days, threatening war if his demand was not met. One of his advisors, noticing the harsh tone of the letter, suggested a kinder approach, but the king refused to heed his counsel. The messenger set off with the letter, traveling swiftly to the river where the mermaids dwelled. When the messenger arrived, he used a flute to call the mermaids, then cast the glass bottle containing the letter into the water. The mermaids soon discovered it, and one brought it to Queen Mary. As she read the king's demands, her anger grew, especially at the king's arrogance and his lack of gratitude. With a fierce resolve, Queen Mary tore the letter in two. Callow, having witnessed this exchange, learned for the first time that the king claimed him as his son. Confusion clouded his mind. He had no memory of this man, who was now demanding his return. Queen Mary gently explained that she had saved Callow as a baby, abandoned by the river, and raised him as her own. Callow felt a wave of gratitude, but also a deep sense of loyalty to his mermaid family. He asked why his real parents had left him, but Queen Mary reassured him that he was loved and that he was part of a greater family. Despite this, Callow could not imagine leaving the mermaids, and he refused to go with the king. Princess Decca, overhearing the conversation, became distressed at the thought of losing Callow. She swore that no one would take him away. Queen Mary, resolute in her decision, told the mermaids that Callow would not be returned to the king. She sent another letter to the king, but in her heart, she feared what the next days would bring. On the third day, the king arrived at the riverbank, armored and accompanied by his soldiers. Queen Mary emerged from the water, her regal presence commanding. The king, filled with rage, demanded the return of his son. Queen Mary, calm and unwavering, confronted him. She reminded the king that she had saved Callow's life, and yet he demanded him back with no gratitude or respect. The king's fury intensified, and he threatened to take Callow by force. But Queen Mary stood her ground, her resolve as strong as the river itself. The battle that ensued was fierce. The king's strength and speed initially overwhelmed Queen Mary, forcing her back. But as the fight wore on, something changed. The mermaids sensed that Callow's power was growing stronger, infusing Queen Mary with renewed strength. The tides of battle shifted, and Queen Mary began to push back against the king's onslaught. In a desperate bid to defeat her, the king resorted to dark magic, amplifying his strength and wounding Queen Mary. But at that moment, Callow emerged from the river, his body glowing with an intense, otherworldly light. He confronted his father, telling him that his pride would be his undoing. The king, enraged, demanded that Callow join him in destroying the mermaids. But Callow refused. He chose to defend Queen Mary and the mermaids as his true family. As Callow healed Queen Mary's wounds with his powerful magic, the king's soldiers, witnessing his strength and the goodness in his heart, began to turn against him. Realizing he had lost control, the king launched a final, desperate attack. But Queen Mary, now empowered by Callow's light, easily evaded his blows. The king's soldiers stood frozen, no longer willing to follow him. In the end, the king's pride broke, and he fell to his knees, apologizing for the destruction his arrogance had caused. Queen Mary lowered her sword and helped him to his feet. The king, humbled, asked for forgiveness, and Callow, now standing as a prince in his own right, forgave him. He taught the king that true leadership was not defined by pride, but by kindness and humility. The two armies, once poised for war, now retreated in peace. The king, having learned his lesson, ruled with fairness and compassion from that day forward. Callow, having united the two worlds, continued to visit both the Mermaid Kingdom and his father's realm. Under his leadership, the two kingdoms flourished together. Years later, Callow became king, banning dark magic and ruling with wisdom, kindness, and fairness. His story, passed down through generations, became a legend, a tale of pride, forgiveness, and the strength of humility.